Hello everyone, now let us discuss about various ICD-10 codes for sepsis. Now first of all coming to sepsis. For sepsis NOS or whenever organism is not specified, the default code is A41.9 which indicates sepsis unspecified organism. Next coming to severe sepsis. For severe sepsis minimum of two codes are required. The first code is A41.9 to indicate sepsis, followed by R65.20 to indicate severe sepsis without septic shock. Then any associated organ failure. So severe sepsis requires a minimum of 2 or 3 codes. Next coming to severe sepsis with acute respiratory failure. This is an example. For severe sepsis with acute respiratory failure, first you need to code sepsis code, that is A41.9, followed by R65.20, then followed by J96.90 which indicates acute respiratory failure. Next coming to septic shock. Septic shock is nothing but sepsis with circulatory failure. So septic shock, for septic shock there are two codes. First is A41.9 to indicate sepsis, followed by R65.21 which is nothing but severe sepsis with the septic shock. R65.20 is severe sepsis without septic shock and R65.21 is severe sepsis with septic shock. And if any associated organ dysfunction can also be coded here. Next coming to post-procedural septic shock. This is general septic shock. Next coming to septic shock which occurs after a procedure. After a procedure, sepsis progresses and sepsis then progresses to septic shock. In that case, first you need to code the underlying infection which is nothing but sepsis, that is A41.9, followed by T81.12x. T81.12 is nothing but post-procedural septic shock, and this code requires a seventh character. It can be either A, D or S. A for initial, D for subsequent and S for sequela. And in all the cases I am using only A41.9 because this is sepsis NOS. If there is any specific organism and if there are specific combination codes, if you see in the tabular list A41 category, you can find various sepsis codes. So whenever the physician describes any specified organism and it has a specific code, you need to code that code. Here I am simply taking sepsis NOS. That is why I am using only A41.9. So for post-procedural septic shock, first A41.9 followed by T81.12x which requires a seventh character A, D or S plus any associated organ dysfunction if any. Next coming to sepsis due to post-procedural infection. Whenever a sepsis occurs due to post-procedural infection, first you need to code PDX from the category T81.41 to 43. And this also requires a seventh character. This can be A, D or S. Now coming to the description of T81.41, it indicates infection following a procedure, superficial incisional surgical site. 41 is for superficial incisional surgical site. 42 is for deep incisional surgical site. And 43 is for organ and space surgical site. So depending upon the provider's documentation, either you can code 41, 42 or 43. Followed by T81.44x. This also requires a seventh character. T81.44 is nothing but sepsis following a procedure. Then followed by code for sepsis. Next coming to sepsis due to OB procedure. Previously this is any general procedure, and for OB procedure also you have three categories: O86.01, 02 and 03. For sepsis due to intramuscular or subfacial abscess which indicates deep incisional site following a OB procedure, the PDX should be O86.01, 02, O86.02 followed by O86.04. O86.04 indicates sepsis following a OB procedure, then followed by code for sepsis. And in any case, if the patient has severe sepsis, appropriate code from the subcategory R65.2 should also be assigned with additional code for any acute organ dysfunction. This is a common guideline. If the patient has severe sepsis, additionally with the code for sepsis, you need to code from subcategory R65.2, and additionally if there is any acute organ dysfunction, you need to code that also. Next, coming to sepsis due to subcutaneous or stitch abscess. This is nothing but superficial incisional site. Following a OB procedure, PDX should be O86.01 plus O86.04 plus code for sepsis. And below guideline is common. If the patient has severe sepsis, you need to code appropriately. Next, coming for sepsis due to intra-abdominal or subphrenic. These are the terminologies that you need to look in the document. If the physician documents intra-abdominal abscess, then you need to quote sepsis due to organ and space site. If the physician documents subcutaneous or stitch abscess, you need to quote superficial incisional site. If the physician documents intramuscular or subfacial abscess, you need to quote deep incisional site. So these you can find them in the tabular list, not in the alphabetical index. And for sepsis due to intra-abdominal or subphrenic abscess, that is organ and space site following a OB procedure, the PDX is O86.03 plus O86.04 plus code for sepsis. And the guideline for severe sepsis is common. Next, coming to sepsis following infusion, transfusion or therapeutic injection. Here PDX should be from T80.2. This also requires an appropriate 7th character. T80.2 indicates infections following infusion, transfusion and therapeutic injection. This must be the PDX followed by code for sepsis. Next, for severe sepsis following infusion, transfusion or therapeutic injection, the PDX should be from category T80.2 followed by code for sepsis and followed by R65.02 subcategory to indicate severe sepsis, and additionally code for any associated organ failure must also be coded. Next, coming to sepsis following immunization. Here the PDX should be from the category T88.0. This also requires an appropriate 7th character, and these are further expandable. T88.0 indicates infection following immunization. It should be the PDX followed by code for sepsis. And for severe sepsis following immunization, PDX should be T88.0 category followed by code for sepsis followed by R65.2 category followed by any additional code for associated organ failure or organ dysfunction. Now coming to code for post-procedural infection and post-procedural septic shock. So post-procedural infection develops into post-procedural septic shock, PDX should be from the category T81.41, 42 or 43 that we have discussed earlier, followed by T81.44, that is sepsis following a procedure, followed by code for sepsis, followed by T81.12X, which is nothing but post-procedural septic shock, and additionally any associated organ failures. This must be the sequence in order to code post-procedural septic shock. Next, coming to sepsis and severe sepsis associated with a non-infectious process. For example, trauma, it can be a burn or an injury. For sepsis and severe sepsis associated with a non-infectious process. Previously, we have discussed the infectious process, post-procedural infection developing into sepsis. And sepsis can develop without a non-infectious process also. This can be trauma. In that case, code for trauma should be the PDX. It can be either burn or injury, followed by code for sepsis, followed by R65.2 series if there is severe sepsis and any associated organ dysfunction. Next, coming to septic shock. For septic shock also, following a non-infectious process, code from the trauma should be the PDX. It can be burn or injury plus code for sepsis plus, because it is septic shock, code from subcategory R65.21. This is nothing but severe sepsis with septic shock followed by any acute organ dysfunction must be coded. Next, coming to OB case, sepsis and septic shock complicating pregnancy. For sepsis and septic shock complicating pregnancy, the code must be O98.81. O98.81. This requires a sixth character to indicate the trimester. Sixth character 1 to indicate first trimester, 2 to indicate second trimester, 3 to indicate third trimester, and 9 to indicate unspecified trimester. Plus code for sepsis. And if the patient has severe sepsis, appropriate code from R65.2 should be coded additionally. Along with it, if there is any organ dysfunction, that must also be coded. Next, coming to sepsis and septic shock complicating childbirth. For that, the PDX should be O98.82. O98.82 must be the PDX, followed by code for sepsis, and guideline for severe sepsis is common. Next, coming to puerperal sepsis. The code must be O85. The code for puerperal sepsis is O85, followed by secondary code to identify the organism, which comes under category B95 to B97, and if applicable, if there is any severe sepsis, R65.2 series with any associated organ dysfunction must also be coded. And one important point that I have forgot in the previous slide is, whenever we are coding pregnancy, that is O98.81, when you are coding O98.81 to indicate sepsis complicating pregnancy, additionally you need to code weeks of gestation also. That point we did not mention there. Please note it. Whenever we are coding pregnancy related issues, additionally weeks of gestation must also be coded. Next, coming to sepsis following complete or unspecified spontaneous abortion. For it, the PDX should be O03.87 followed by code to identify the organism. Then, if there is any severe sepsis, R65.2 category, if applicable, must be coded with any associated organ dysfunction. Next, coming to sepsis following failed attempted termination of pregnancy. If the sepsis occurs due to failed attempted termination of pregnancy, PDX should be from the category O07.37 followed by code to identify the organism, which can be given from B95 to B97, plus if there is any severe sepsis, code for severe sepsis and any associated organ dysfunction. Next, coming to sepsis following ectopic and molar pregnancy. For it, the PDX should be O08.82 plus code to identify the organism and code for severe sepsis if applicable. Next, coming to sepsis following induced termination of pregnancy. For it, the PDX should be O04.87 followed by code to identify the organism plus code for severe sepsis if applicable. Next, coming to newborn sepsis or congenital sepsis or bacterial sepsis of newborn. In all the cases, the code is from the subcategory or category T36. Newborn codes are given in P36. This is further expandable. P36 plus if there is any severe sepsis, code for severe sepsis and associated organ dysfunction must be coded. Finally, coming to hemolytic uremic syndrome associated with sepsis. If the reason for admission is hemolytic uremic syndrome that is associated with sepsis, in this case, code D59.31, infection associated hemolytic uremic syndrome should be coded as PDX, followed by code for sepsis and any other conditions such as severe sepsis should be assigned as secondary diagnosis. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for further videos on medical coding and CPC training.